David Goodwin and Pete Hegseth's book, Battle for the American Mind, was on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 12 weeks, including being in the #1 nonfiction bestseller slot. The book awakened many people for the first time to the significant changes that have happened in education and schools in the past 100 years in our country, and the need for rediscovering classical Christian education. David is now back with his newest book that unpacks for parents and educators what he calls a field guide for how to actually implement classical Christian education in our schools and homes. Join us for this episode of BaseCamp Live.
Mountains. We all face them as we seek to influence the next generation. Get equipped to conquer the challenges, summit the peak, and shape exceptionally thoughtful, compassionate, and flourishing human beings. We call it Ancient Future Education for raising the next generation. Welcome to BaseCamp Live. Now your host, Davies Owens.
Welcome to another episode of BaseCamp Live. Davies Owens here on the journey with you to raise the next generation. It is a joy to have you along with us. These great interviews that we've been doing now for almost 10 years happen because of the fact that you listen each week, which is a huge part of what makes a podcast work. It's really a partnership, and I appreciate it. I always love hearing from you. You know, it's kind of a one-sided conversation in this particular format. So an email, info@basecamplive.com, is always a great way to hear from you. What's on your mind? What questions do you have? I also am asking for introductions to alumni that have made an impact in your school. It's a lot of joy celebrating and hearing from those who've gone through our K-12 journey and have benefited from their education and are able to look back. So we've done our alumni series from time to time, and would love to get a few more people on the other side of the microphone. So if you know of anybody, let me know. Love to reach out to them. And likewise, we are also trying to do more series. So the What is Classical Christian Education is also something you can find in our series on the website there at basecamplive.com. We are so grateful for all of you who listen, especially schools and school leaders that encourage their parents to join us. Of course, BaseCamp Live is just as much for parents as it is for school administrators and educators and just people in general in life trying to raise the next generation. So a real shout out to Susan Crozier, head of school at Grace Preparatory School in Arlington, Texas. Susan is also a good friend and a fellow coach at the Herzog Foundation with me. We coach the parent engagement 2.5-day training, which you should know about. If you've not taken advantage of the great free resources of Herzog, you should check them out on the Herzog Foundation's website. But you're likely to see Susan and myself there. So Susan, thanks for your encouragement and for the work you do at Grace Prep. And then a big shout out to Deborah Larson Yarpe, who's the head of school at Maranatha Christian Academy in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Again, thank you both for being a part of the BaseCamp Live community and Zipcast as well. Well, David Goodwin is certainly no stranger to BaseCamp Live. David is a good friend. We've known each other for many, many years. He is a pioneer in the classical Christian school movement. He co-authored, as I mentioned at the beginning, this #1 New York Times bestseller, Battle for the American Mind with Pete Hegseth. He also helped found the Ambrose School in Meridian, Idaho, where he was for 13 years, serving in the capacity of head of school before moving into his role as president of the ACCS, where he's been since 2015. He's also the editor of the Classical Difference magazine that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and the author of Discover Classical Christian Education. His newest book, which we're talking about, called The Forging of the American Mind, is a real help as an insider's guide to understanding, as he says, a field guide to classical education. David is also on the board of academic advisors for the CLT and has served as an advisor for the Fox News documentary, The Miseducation of America. He is a prolific writer and speaker and contributor to this movement. He lives in Boise, Idaho with his wife, Stormy. They have 3 adult children, and one of whom teaches at a classical Christian school. Before we jump into this interview, a big thank you to our sponsors, the folks at the Wise Phone, which is a great alternative to the fully functioning social media addicted smartphones that are out there. You can still do all the functional things you need to do without getting pulled into those temptations. Wise Phone also offers a discount if you go to the BaseCamp Live webpage and check our partners page. You'll find that link. Also, a shout out, as I just mentioned, to the Herzog Foundation, to Life Architects Coaching, and to Robert Littlejohn and Chuck Evans and their great book, Wisdom and Eloquence. And finally, just to mention to the work that we're doing with Zipcast. Of course, that's really kind of what I do every day, is helping schools communicate better, especially between parents, and schools, we have a new option this year that we're rolling out, which is a 8-week new parent onboarding option. So if you're a school that uses Zipcast, or maybe you've never used it, this is a great way to help invite and blend your specific new parent information at your school, along with high-value content from subject matter experts on topics like forming habits at home that complement the work of your school. All of this and more is at the zipcast.media webpage. Without further ado, here's my conversation with David Goodwin. Well, David Goodwin, welcome to BaseCamp Live.
It's good to be here once again. It's been a few years, but we've been doing this for what, 10 now?
Yeah, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary in November. And David, it's a joy to have you back on BaseCamp. You've been with me from the very beginning. In fact, you and I have done a lot of life together. Mm-hmm. And I'm indebted to you much of my own understanding of classical Christians because of, I think early on, you gave me the big manuscript you were working on before Battle for the American Mind came out.
Right,
which
right.
I saw and was early on really, I think, drawn even deeper into an understanding of classical Christians. So.
Yep. Well, I'm gratified. It is as popular as BaseCamp has become. It's a voice across the whole network and out beyond that. So it's good to see what's happened.
It's a joy to be a part of it. But yeah, your voice has been a critical part of the movement, and I'm again honored to get to sit down here with you. Share a little bit of, just very briefly, your story into classical. That could take the whole episode, I know, but just a little bit. And then what prompted initially the writing of Battle for the American Mind. That was really, and then that book has obviously been significant in terms of the
Right. Well, in the 1990s, I got kind of pulled into classical education. I didn't even have kids yet, but I got pulled into a classical school, ended up running the school in the 2000s. Sometime in there, in the development of the Ambrose School in Boise, I went to a lecture and heard a quote from a early progressive in about the 1915 timeframe on what their objectives were with education. Right. And it used words that like plasticity that were pretty provocative, and so I wanted to understand more what we were doing because we could better understand what they were doing, the progressives. And so in doing that, I went to the library, did some research, and you were had early exposure to the manuscript that later was integrated into Battle for the American Mind when Pete Hegseth heard the story. He wanted to get it out there. We did a documentary called Miseducation of America on Fox. You can still see it on Fox Nation. Mm-hmm. And then we put out the book together about 2022. And the book went quickly to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for 4 weeks and stayed on the list the whole summer. And so we decided there should be a follow-on. Pete had other projects under contract, and so I ended up writing the follow-on, which is Forging the American Mind. That's how
which is what we're going to be talking about here today. But
yeah.
Why do you think Battle was so well received? It obviously struck a chord with so many people.
Well, I think it's because it tied very tangibly the world we live in today to classical education, which is hard for a lot of people to do. And when Pete first called me, he called me because he'd run into a couple of little girls who went to one of our schools in North Carolina. When he met them, he could tell that there was something different about the way they were raised, about the way they were educated. So his mother's the one, or their mother is the one that said, hey, you can go talk to the Association of Classical Christian Schools because they're the ones who accredit these schools. So he did, and that's how we started talking about it. But interestingly, he was a Fox News host. Right. So what made it so interesting to him was that the civic problems that we were seeing in the world today really can be traced back to that experiment that the progressives did in the early part of the 20th century. Right. It's a generational activity, education is, and it creates this thing called paideia, which is an ancient Greek concept, but it then built into later into other things and became sort of the anchor of the West as to how the West was built in its origins. And when he saw that, okay, a lot of people are frustrated out there because they see things happening that are just wrong. Yeah. It's just America's not going in the right direction.
Right.
And Pete was the guy to tie that directly to why classical Christian education creates a paideia that is the essence of what America was.
Which was his own personal journey of discovery was significant. I mean, it changed his life. He moved, he put his kids into classical school. I mean, it was a discovery that I think many people are making and have made, that this idea of just reading, writing, and arithmetic in Christian school is with, chapel on Friday, and that's Christian education.
Right.
We've missed the grander story behind it all. I know that for me in reading your manuscript was when I heard really for the first time paideia and thought, okay, there is a serious underbelly to this thing that no one really understands.
Well, there was a guy named, doesn't matter, Jaeger Warner in the 1940s and 50s who realized that no one really understood this concept anymore. So he decided to write about it.
Right.
And it took like 3,000 pages. I mean, it's 3 volumes. Yeah. It's unbelievable because the concept of paideia is so important to the way we view the world, the way we think.
Yeah. And it comes from that idea in Paul's writing in Ephesians, just that we're to, to form or to raise up our children, and this idea of, we think of it as maybe discipleship. There's not a good English translation of what we're talking about, but I always think of paideia as, it is like the software that your hardware runs on. It's the deepest core of who you are.
No, you're right. That's a better way of right. thinking about it. It's essentially the way I see it now, after years of working with it, is that you can't go deep enough to understand yourself. When it comes to paideia, because every thought you have is anchored on something that you were very early on taught.
Right.
And of course, the story I tell in brief, the Greeks discovered paideia because they were trying to figure out how to do a democracy. And for a democracy, the big concern was tyranny.
Right.
Why do you want a democracy instead of a kingdom or an empire? Because one man can become a tyrant and control everything, right? So they want to form up a democracy, but how do you prevent one man from persuading people who are easily deceived into something?
Right.
And they said, well, we need a liberal or a free paideia, a paideia that doesn't, that is able to ask the right questions and learn for ourselves, what truth is. Yeah. And that will allow democracy to flourish. And that's why our current one is struggling.
Because we've lost our grounding.
The paideia of the Western liberal mind is, and obviously liberal in this case, is a Christian form of liberalism that's very different than what we think of politically.
Right. So the whole, again, premise initially, and just again setting these 2 books up, Battle really awakened people to this underbelly of current that's been happening in our world, like how we got to where we are and why the formation of paideia, which is integral in the life of the school, but also the home and the church. That if we're not aware of paideia, I've grown through a lot of your writing on this, but there is no neutrality. Everybody has a paideia. And again, everybody's working off a software. There's something that's programmed deeper than them. How do they see themselves? How do they see their world? How do they understand God? Therefore, we in the education business are forming paideias whether we like it or not. It's just how well are we doing?
Yep. Every human, all 8 billion humans on Earth have a paideia. It's how it was developed that's different.
And the premise in Battle, which is, again, in Forging, we're going to get to the new book, but is really the idea that the progressives early on figured out, this is the holy grail. If we can control the software of how people see who they are at the deepest level of their identity, then we can control civilization. And that's what Western civilization was built on, a proper paideia. We lost it. Others took it over, and here we are today. So,
and this book, the new one, Forging the American Mind, starts out with an even more indicting quote than we had in Battle.
Do tell.
And it, I'll leave it for the book.
Okay.
But the point is, this dates back to an effort that started in the 1820s and took off in the 1850s and 60s. And it was an effort to captivate the paideia of Americans all the way back. Yeah. That take them away from the parents, so that, because if you think about it, progressivism has a few features, but one of them is we have to leave the past behind and seek some future utopia.
Right.
And the problem with that scheme is that it's very hard to leave the past behind when the paideia is in the control of parents in the community, right? So they had to separate that away, and that's why they built the public school system, to take kids out of their parents' homes and out of their parents' influence on the paideia. And so even the schools prior to this were promoting the same paideia the parents had, which was the Western Christian paideia. And we talk about the WCP, or the Western Christian paideia, in Battle for the American Mind.
And that idea is ultimately formation of deep wisdom and virtue, which has biblical underpinning. So as opposed to a utilitarian education and a progressive education that leads to just...
Yeah, one of the things that Forging the American Mind brings out that's new, that wasn't in Battle as much, is that really the paideia that we are promoting is not the Greek or Roman and classical paideia. When we say classical Christian, we're talking about the Christianization of the concept of a liberal education. But when you think about it, freedom or liberality, freedom of the mind, is really not an open field to be free to think whatever you want. It's freedom to think rightly in the Christian way. In other words, Jesus said he's the way, the truth, and the life. That's a very distinctive road that you're on, away to the truth and then to life. So you know it, and then you live it. That's and so interestingly, the two central elements of any classical school are the trivium and the quadrivium. Both of those are the three ways and the four ways. So they're the ways to come to truth so that you may live according to the truth. And that's
a really helpful framework. So we're going to take a break in a minute, but I want to, again, just setting this up because I want to get into the new book, Foraging. But you began, so Battle was initially to awaken people to just there is a battle. And it's a battle is an intentional word. I mean, it's a warring term because it's literally we're fighting and battling for the hearts and minds of our civilization, for our children. It's that significant. And then foraging is now coming in really, I know you've called it a field guide. It's really like, okay, now that we know there's a problem, how do we course correct? So here's the way to do it. Okay, great. Let's take a break and we're going to get into how to do it because this is important. All right. If you're seeking an education that helps your child thrive academically and spiritually, Wilson Hill Academy has spent years developing a model that I want you to know about. In their free guide, you'll see how their thoughtfully sequenced curriculum prepares students for college and how a biblical worldview helps them understand the world around them with clarity, and how their discussion-based classes teach them to think critically, not just what to think. You'll also discover how their teachers equip students to live purposefully for Christ. With accredited live online classes, your child can learn from master teachers anywhere with an internet connection, all within a community that has transformed families like yours. Download their free guide today at wilsonhillacademy.com/guide or in the link in our show notes. During this short break, I have a special invitation to all school leaders, administrators, and teachers. I want you to imagine for a moment stepping away from your everyday routine at school and diving deep into the rich foundations of Christian education, surrounded by world-class scholars, seasoned classroom teachers, and administrative experts with years of experience running schools with a lot of wisdom to share. That's exactly what the Herzog Foundation's Institute is offering. I've had the joy of serving as a training coach for the last few years, leading their 2.5-day training on spiritual formation and another one on parent engagement. They offer close to 50 unique training events ranging from board governance to marketing to classroom best practices. They even offer a training on how to teach the great books. And the best part of all, well, thanks to the generosity of the Herzog Foundation, these training events, including lodging, are completely free for Christian educators. Institutes are located around the country in beautiful locations, including at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and the Reagan Library in Santa Barbara. Don't miss this incredible opportunity. Check out the details at theherzogfoundation.com. David, we were just saying the first book, Battle, is clearly that word is kind of, I'm thinking Ephesians 6. I mean, we're fighting for the hearts and minds of our children. I think every parent relates to that. But there comes a time where, okay, let's now get back to the work that God called us to do. And so you've titled the new book, Forging the American Mind. Why the word forging?
Well, because the publisher...
What word did you have?
We went through a lot of titles. I like Forging in the end. It sounds a little bit, for some classical educators, maybe a little bit too mechanical, a little less like gardening, which is what a lot of classical educators
Cultivation.
like to think. But I think for the metaphor, it works well. When you're going to, all right, so we see the battle we're in at the end of Battle for the American Mind.
Right.
What we called for was an insurgency, which means that the progressives have taken the high ground. It's going to be very hard to unseat the modern progressive paideia. They've taken 100 years to put it into place. So our call as Christians is now to go into, when I had the conversation with Pete, he was a counterinsurgency officer in the Army, and I asked him, what is that? And he said, well, we can conquer the territory, but we have to change the hearts and minds of the people in the territory to think that we're the good guys, right? So he would go village to village with his squad and try and bring in something else. And I think that's why it resonated, the idea of paideia resonated so much with him, because his eyes just lit up when I started talking about this, because he lived it. He'd gone into Afghan villages. He'd tried to get these people to see things like it's good to educate your daughters, for example, or it's good, these sorts of things. And having none of it, right? It just was bouncing off like rain off a duck. And so he really resonated with it. And when we think about a battle, we can't win the battle without resetting the exercise of forging the minds of kids. And so with a metaphor, this is what I've affectionately, it's called a year by year guide, but I like to call it a field guide, because that's kind of the military sort of image. If you believe Battle for the American Mind, you need this book so that you know how to take it into battle with you and figure out, both for yourself personally, to read through it and understand, okay, this is how I can shape my own paideia insofar as I'm able to transform it, which is hard to do with adults, easier with kids. Or if I want to do it with my kids, how do I prevent myself from basically imprinting too much of this progressive paideia that I was given in the public schools back onto them. So forging is kind of that picture of shaping them. Well,
and it's, as you and I have talked about for decades now, the classical Christian education is hard enough to explain like what it is, much less how to do it. And I think that's probably the biggest need in our schools right now. And I know a lot of ACCS's efforts are on equipping the teacher to actually implement it well. And so this is a field guide. You were saying before, a lot of us classical folks would point to Dorothy Sayers and Lost Tools as kind of an early reference point for how to do it, but so often we still come up short. So where do you see as a movement we've often caught the vision but not known how to do it? I mean, this is kind of where we are.
Well, when I wrote the book, it was a tall order, and it would not have been my first choice of a book to write, because it's a lot of work. It took 4 years.
It's quite impressive amount of work.
Yeah. So what I did was I went back to the beginning and started reading the works that we had used early on. And Dorothy Sayers is often, at this point, assumed into the canon, and a lot of people don't reread it. They think they know what it says. They think if you're inside the movement anyways, you think it's about what some people have tied to ages and stages, because she makes some alignments with the age of the child and the trivium, and that kind of is the thing that people could grab hold of because it was tangible. So I start out the book saying we missed the point. The point is, what is education? She starts with that. And she ends with that in The Lost Tools of Learning. The title itself is pretty insightful, but it's easy to miss. Because I missed it for years. Because, how to learn? Well, read a book. There's lots of easy ways to learn. That's not true. It's very hard to learn well. Coming to a knowledge of the truth is one of the most challenging things because of sin, and because of our own defective paideias, and because of the limitations of our minds. It's very hard to come to a knowledge of the truth. So this book starts out saying, really, classical education can be boiled down to two things. Progressive education is about what Bloom's taxonomy says is, what do you know and what skills do you have? So, do you know the states and capitals? Can you thread a needle or saw a board, whatever, because they were into vocational stuff a lot. So what do you know? That's not the question. The question is, how do you know? It's not what do you know, it's how do you know? Because that gets you to a much deeper level of truth than you can get to with information, which is what the progressives give you. They spoon feed you information. This book is about how you teach a child to acquire knowledge.
It's truly a liberal education because you're liberating them to think on their own, which is what we want. And
along the way, they learn a lot of stuff. And parents sometimes get confused. They go, so you're telling me we shouldn't be teaching history and literature and science or whatever? No, those are what Dorothy Sayers called grist for the mill. And what she meant by that is any good mill needs good material, new good grain to turn into good flour. But the mill itself is the magic ingredient. Without it, you aren't going to get flour. So you've got to build the mill. You've got to forge the mill.
Is the concern? I know we've talked about this many times over the years. Is that so many well-intending classical Christian schools again clamoring a bit for, okay, I think I know how to explain it. I'm not sure how to do it. Oh, look, there's the trivium. When asked what is classical education, it's three parts. It's grammar and logic and rhetoric, and you do these things. It's almost like, look, we built some shelves, and we kind of stop there. We stop short of that deeper understanding of how to actually educate. Is that fair to say that we kind of, at least early on, what we called Gen 1 schools, it was trivium. It's all about trivium, and we missed the deeper point.
And actually, I think we're missing something right now, and that's what the book brings out. Because as I did the research, so one of the things, you and I, this is inside baseball a little bit. We'll talk about
we'll let
this,
people listen.
We know that discussions around tables in high schools is a feature of classical Christian schools.
Socratic discussions.
We call them Socratic discussions, but nobody does them the same way, really, in any of our, they're kind of sometimes based in literature inquiry or something like that. And so I decided part of this book was just telling what I knew from observing hundreds of classical schools in my role. Part of it was uncovering some dusty corners that no one had figured out yet. And one of the reasons that ties to your question is that the trivium itself was not invented in Greece and Rome, like people think, because they did have those liberal arts, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, astronomy, number, geometry, and music. They had those things and a few other arts. It was the medievals who organized them into the 3 ways to knowledge and the 4 ways to knowledge. And those are different sets of knowledge. We don't need to go into that today. But the 3 ways to knowledge is grammar, logic, and rhetoric are very different in the Christian sort of the Christian implementation or transformation of them made them very different than the Greek and Roman form, and that happened in the high medieval age between about 1080 and about 1350. So I start out the book saying we have missed a little bit here because this how do you know thing. The key to the book, one of the keys to the book, is a civilization is built on. It's the $2 word. It's epistemology, how you know things, right? If you go to a jungle tribe, you're very likely to watch them perform activities, whether it's farming activities or social activities. And if you ask them why, they're going to maybe talk about the shamans or talk about the heavens or looking around, or my parents taught me this or whatever. The distinction of the West that's different than all other civilizations is it has a very finely tuned epistemology, a finely tuned way of coming to know things. That took off after the in this Middle Ages time frame. They discovered this form and they perfected it, or at least strengthened it. And then it takes off and we get in eventually many years down the road into the scientific revolution. And those sorts of things are all an outworking of it later. And a lot of times they didn't have great results. But the essence of the epistemology of Christianity is very distinct. So grammar is really not just the word order and knowledge of words. It expands to understand meaning, which ties often to metaphor and to poetics and those sorts of things. The dialectic is not an exercise in argument between two people over the right path. It's an exercise of Christians joining together to find the truth collectively. So how I talk in the book about we need to change our mentality to come let us reason together. So it's not a head-to-head game, it's a let's reason this out together. And of course rhetoric in the Middle Ages gets expanded greatly into all kinds of areas, letter writing, sermon giving, not just standing on a podium and arguing for a political position.
Well, and I think so what I'm hearing is so exciting is that, we are, to step back a bit, I mean, we're still, this rediscovery of classical education. I mean, if we say Dorothy Sayers was kind of an early, 1940s and then early 80s schools started happening. I mean, we're still very early in the scheme of things in this movement. And so this refinement that you're bringing is saying, hey, look, it's great that we've been talking about the trivium and the quadrivium, but maybe we've undervalued or misunderstood at a more elementary level what it is. And you're bringing to life in the book this depth of the epistemology of knowledge. This isn't just memorized chants in grammar school because it's good. Children know how to remember chants. Therefore, we teach it to them in songs and jingles, as opposed to a much more deeper.
Yeah, well, the first two parts of the book, and it is a bigger book than Battle.
480?
Yeah, right? 440, I think.
Wow, okay.
So it is a bigger book, but you can get something out of each part. So when you think of a book that long, you think, what in the world takes that many pages to say?
Right.
Well, if this were a book like Battle, where we were trying to make a persuasive point, that would be too long. What this book is really, it's got two distinct sections, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4.
Right.
1 and 2 are useful for everyone.
Yeah.
No matter if you have kids or don't have kids, they help you frame the way you are, the way you think. I don't just deal with Sayers, actually. I deal with 4 books there.
Okay.
A C.S. Lewis book called The Discarded Image, which is not the one most people often refer to, but it is one of the most influential books in the movement because the discarded image is the high medieval mind. He said we have discarded one of the most vital pieces of the West because we thought it was nothing. Right? It's kind of like one of those hard drives that has Bitcoin on it, somebody threw in the dump, right?
That was a mistake.
And then they have to go dig it out of the dump. And,
Then we're digging it back out.
We're digging out this thing that the high medievals gave us. And that's what Lewis talks about in The Discarded.
So it really is a field guide. So no one's too intimidated by the 450-ish words. You can use the first couple sections just to reframe. Right. And then use the rest of it maybe as a more specific.
Well, sections 2 and 3 I think are going to be interesting to people because they're the sausage making. Yeah. There's a section, for example, in the grammar school on handwriting. The last time I was on the Charlie Kirk show with Charlie, I brought up the importance of handwriting, and he looked at me and said, "You'll have to convince me on that one." And often we do because we think these days keyboards and typing and there's really no, and kids, adults mostly print and what have you. But I go into the whole, how do you teach handwriting and why? Right. And actually, your wife, Holly,
calligrapher,
shout out to her, helped me with the book because I needed some calligraphy help, and she pitched in.
Wow. And the world seems to be becoming more and more interested in the analog world of old, so maybe all of these things will resonate even more. Let's take one last break, and we'll come back. There are definitely a lot of things to point out in this book that, by the way, is coming out officially, dropping when? It's this
June 16th.
June 16th, so this will pair well about the time this episode drops, so you can go find it. But we'll be right back after the break.
Every school year tells a story. The big chapters, like the first day of class or graduation, are easy to see. But the real heart of the story is often written in the quieter pages. A science experiment that sparks wonder, a class pausing to memorize a psalm, a teacher encouraging perseverance when the work gets hard. Those are the moments parents long to hear. That's why we created Zipcast. Each week, families receive a short 10 to 12 minute episode, local updates from their school leaders, paired with syndicated wisdom from trusted national experts in both Christian parenting and education. Parents can listen in the rhythm of daily life, on the drive to practice, while making dinner, or during a quiet walk. Nearly 100 schools are already using Zipcast this year to strengthen trust and community, and fall or winter isn't too late to sign up. It's often the best time to begin. Save your spot at zipcast.media. Zipcast, encouraging you on the go with what you need to know.
Hi there, classical Christian parents, students, and teachers. This is Robert Littlejohn, co-author with Charles Evans of Wisdom and Eloquence, a Christian paradigm for classical learning, published by Crossway Books. We want you to know about our new book with well-known family counselor Keith McCurdy, published by Classical Academic Press. The book is titled Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents: How Classical Christian Education Can Transform Your Children, Your Family, and the World. We have written this shorter, parent-focused book specifically as an admissions and parent education resource for schools and families. We are excited to be proud sponsors of Zipcast and BaseCamp Live, and we hope you are enjoying these two great resources for classical learning as much as we are. And we would invite you to visit our website, wisdomandeloquence.org, to explore the various services offered by the authors of Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents, and to let us know how we can best serve you. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
David, we were talking earlier about the exciting celebration of BaseCamp Live being in its 10th year. One of the very first interviews I did was with George Grant, and I remember George reflecting on his, he's amazing, reflecting on his own discovery of classical education and his reaction, which I think I entitled the episode, it's still out there, I got gypped, because he realized, wait a minute, this is what was going on the whole time. Had no idea about paideia, had no idea about, I thought reading and writing with Chapel on Friday was Christian education. I didn't know what I was up against. There's a lot of folks out there that it's kind of a second awakening of this discovery. And so the book is really helping us figure out how to not only be aware, but now how do we correct this almost unfathomable challenge, as you talked about. This is not something that's going to be quick, but it's something that the beautiful thing is, there are schools, starting all around the world right now that are saying, we're going to go back and do it the way it's Lewis's idea. We lost our way. Let's go back from where we came from. A lot of that going on. Talk a little bit about, I know what caught me when I read through Foraging is this great story that you and Pete resonated on, the cruise ship that crashed. It was on its side for 3 years. Tell the story and how it ties into the point here of the book of how do we set things right.
Well, the funny thing is it tells you how long the project was, because that was a contemporary matter that I didn't have to explain too much back in 2012 when I originally wrote the manuscript. Costa Concordia was a cruise ship that was navigating near the shore of Italy, and the captain decided to do a joyride closer to shore. He hit a rock, ripped a hole in it, and it tipped over on its side and sat there in the water on its side, so half submerged, and it sat there for many years, because when you have it was a tragedy, of course, people died. But when you have something like that happen, by the time, these things are huge. I mean, I've never been on a cruise, but I've seen the cruise ships and been around them.
It's like a skyscraper on its side.
Yeah, exactly. They're a massive thing. And someone took a video camera inside the Costa Concordia and showed it when it was on its side. A scuba diver went in and what have you. And you look at the thing and you can't make out what you're looking at. Because, what is this? And you realize, up is the right side of the ship and down is the left side of the ship, and he's standing on the wall. Right. And if you walk through the ship, there's these trenches that are filled with water, right, that are really just the hallways that used to go off to the side. So anyway, the whole picture of the ship on its side like that. So I played a little mental game, and I said, what if you had been raised as a child in that ship on its side? That's the progressive education system. They took education, they tipped it on its side, and it's barely recognizable from what the West had up until 1900. Right. So the book Foraging starts out with that same metaphor, because it's used in Battle for the American Mind. It says, okay, so they came along later, and the engineers figured out how to right that ship and take it and back and scrap it. They ended up scrapping it, but it was funny, because now you see it upright and you see the water lines and the moss and everything on half the ship, et cetera, et cetera. What if we righted the ship and described how education used to work. And suddenly, what I kept seeing was when people understood classical education for the first time, it takes a while to get into it, but when you get it for the first time, the lights come on and you go, that makes so much sense. Now I know there aren't random trenches in the middle of the walkways, and the chandelier is not on one, on my left side. It's actually on the ceiling. So that's what this book, Forging, is meant to do, is remap the ship if you were on it.
Yeah. It's a great image, and I think everybody, it's almost a second conversion, if I could be that bold, with for some people, of like, oh my gosh, it's the George Grant. I had no idea. I got gypped. I got sold an education that was so inferior to what is possible. And so the good news is there's a very aspirational aspect to it. But again, what I love about the book is it doesn't just stop with aspiration and what you hear at the open houses at the schools. It actually says, okay, now let's get down to work and get this done. So in the closing segments here, are there just, if you could just point to maybe again some specific examples, maybe if you were in a room of grammar school teachers and maybe with upper school, what is an example again of where, hey, grammar school teachers or even grammar school parents, that chandelier is not on this side, it's actually top, like set it back up. What are some examples of things you're setting up in the book?
Well, in the grammar school, there's a lot of different elements to it. Of course, we deal with phonics, we deal with handwriting, we deal with the stories. Stories are a big thing. Unfortunately, what we're finding, I've done some work recently in public schools trying to help repair some of the damage. They're really not redeemable, but at some level I try. And the stories, they have terrible stories, awful stories. And they're not awfulness. Recently they've been truly evil, but mostly they're just vacuous, and there's no depth to them. So, for grammar school, I would say reading not just great stories, but reading them in the old language. If you're going to read Robin Hood, read Green's Robin Hood, the 19th and early 20th century people. So those kind of books, that's a big part. Read more, do more reading, less. I draw focus away a bit from science in the grammar school because I don't think it's not necessary for the key elements of verbal reasoning and quantitative reasoning, which are important in the grammar school. So we get to that. Then you get to middle school and we start dealing with, and some of this I take into the grammar school. So I talked earlier about dialectic instruction. That's such a big part of the secondary. I went through and did a lot of research on that. Interestingly, we often call it the Socratic method. The Socratic method is a term that really booms onto the scene in the 1890s and 1880s, and then becomes kind of a definitional thing in classical education. But it wasn't there before that, and so you're wondering what was it? Well, the Socratic method was a function of, again, de-Christianizing classical education because they went back to the Greeks and Romans, and it's a derivative of if you were to teach like Socrates taught, what would it look like? And so you have, of course, Socrates, the dialogues of Socrates are very pointed. They're really set up to make you think. There's a big question as to whether they're actually effective as a teaching mechanism or whether they're effective for other things. But some do find use in teaching, so there's a whole section on how to do the Socratic method well. But it's hard to do, and it's one of 6 that I expand on in the book. The other 5 are the first 3 are the training, what I call the training forms. So the training wheel, you may remember that at Ambrose when we were there, we piloted that. That's based in Form 6, which is Anselm's inquiry, but it's teaching it to 5th graders. And the reason you have to start teaching the 5th, 6th, 7th graders this complex form of training the mind is because there's rules you have to learn before you. It's kind of like if you're going to play baseball, you have to learn the rules in Little League, right? You have to kind of get the basics down. But nobody plays baseball in the majors like they did in Little League, right? So the next section in there in the training forms is the literature discussion where you train kids how to read a book, basically. I talk a lot in the book about Adler's How to Read a Book, which is one of the ways. That comes in later as well. And then the third one is the Christian worldview discussion, which is tied to whatever the thing is you're studying, what is it saying and is it true? And the key behind this is that when you're studying something, let's say you're studying the size of galaxies, right? Well, what you're reading is actually written by somebody. You can't study the size of a galaxy by yourself. You have no idea they exist if it's just you. You have to get it from a book or from a web page or something like that. So as you're reading that, what is it saying and is it true? So that's the third of the training forms.
So again, this gets deep quick, which is again why it's over 400 pages. But again, what I love is that you're bringing a resource that's really not been largely present in this movement of really getting specific, because I think the risk is often, schools that quote do Socratic dialogue, but they've really not done it well. And I guess there's a point even where you could do some damage. I mean, if Socratic dialogue is just literally just everybody saying what they think, it's just like bad talk radio and nobody's really...
Well, the irony there is that was the problem, is that's what I found in some schools, and it was nothing like Socratic dialogues if you read them.
Right.
So I was looking at everybody saying what they think, and then Socrates... And Socrates, that doesn't fly with Socrates. That's not the way he works. Yeah. So it's very different. And then Anselm's Inquiry is probably the pinnacle. I won't go into any more detail, but it's kind of the pinnacle of the book. What I did was I thought, okay, so now that I've figured out why Socratic dialogue or Socratic method is a thing, I know that they went back to look at the Socratic dialogues. What if we went back to the best Christian dialogues? And so I asked the question, who has written the best Christian dialogues? And the answer I got from about 5 of my friends is St. Anselm. Yeah. He's a saint that was around 1080 to 1120, 1140, somewhere in there. And he had a series of dialogues himself. So we can do the same thing with him. We can go look at his dialogue. Right. Thing is, they teach us a different way to discuss. And we talked about that.
Well, I love that you're anchoring this back to historical best practices and ultimately taking every thought captive to Christ. So how do we bring this dialogue back into into the deepest questions, or then have the deepest and most truthful answers? So putting that together back into Scripture. Well, again, time is never enough. What I love about this, in the last 5 minutes, I'm sure parents are like, wow, I don't know if I get that book. That sounds pretty intense. There is an intensity for people that want to roll their sleeves up and let's learn the art of teaching well. But there's also some very maybe higher level important understandings that anybody needs to be aware of, as far as if you're going to take raising the next generation seriously, if you want to understand education at its best, this is a great resource of the field guide.
I think the way I would read it if I bought it, and I certainly would suggest that people do. Yes. The first 2 sections I'd read straight through, because the part 1 and part 2 are meant to be read as a narrative. Yeah. Then part 3 and part 4 are resources. So use them.
It's a field guide. Right.
Yeah. Use them to learn more bit by bit. You can go to part 6 or part. You just move around. Doesn't matter, chapter 6 or chapter 10, whatever. Great. You can move around. So that's how I would use it. Now, the last chapter is probably the one that the publisher, my poor editor, I felt sorry for her having to read through all this stuff. She got the last chapter and said, now this is what I wanted. Oh, no. So, the whole time. Can we move this up? Well, let's make them wait for it. It's, okay, so you've been gypped. What do you do? How do you as an adult get a classical education? And so it takes you through a concrete kind of sort of reading list and some things. And it's I thought when I wrote it, for a moment I thought I should research this and do all this stuff. And I thought, you know what? There's 1,000 ways to do this, and they're all right. Yeah. So I'm just going to tell you how I think the best way to get a classical education for an adult is, and I walk you through some books that you can read and some things you can do. And
good, because I think that's definitely the reaction is, gosh, I got gypped. How is it too late for me? And you're just never too late. So
and certainly if you have kids,
lean over their shoulder a bit.
You and I have both had this experience. They can become intimidating at some point.
Oh, for sure.
I still call my daughter, who started kindergarten when I started working at the school, to get understandings of what Latin, Greek, and Hebrew mean in these certain contexts, because even the AI doesn't get it right.
Right. No, it's a gift. So it's not too late for anyone. This great resource, what an incredible contribution to the movement, David. Thank you for all you have done and now are doing through the book. And I hope it will be as successful as Battle was in terms of the footprint.
Well, I hope it helps people.
I know it will. David, thank you as always for your contribution and your friendship and just the great work you do.
You bet, Davies. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of BaseCamp Live. Be sure to check out our website, basecamplive.com, for more than 8 years of timeless episodes that you'll find helpful and encouraging, as well as the helpful resources offered on our partners page. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of our partners like the Herzog Foundation. See you back next week.